And so now we're going to go through what is really the first computer revolution in the history of computers, the first actual step function change we have. The future is not quantum, it's quantum first and quantum heavy. You now see Nobel Prizes coming out of corporate labs. That is incredibly astute. So you know what that looks like in another 10 years? It's coming out of households. So where does credibility come from? Credibility and execution became the same thing. The future is upon us, and we are only going to find out what that future is as it unfolds like a flower, like a lily coming out of the mud in front of us. There is no way to predict any of this technology. What we can guarantee is that only those of us participating in it, and this is why the billion minds concept is so important to me, are going to be a part of that future.
Welcome to another episode of the Quantum Economy Podcast. Today I'm talking to William Hurley, aka Whurley, a visionary American tech entrepreneur and the author of the famous Quantum Computing for Babies. Whurley is the CEO and founder of Strangeworks, where he, together with his team, is building a hardware-agnostic quantum platform to provide access to researchers, developers, and enterprises all around the world. In our conversation, we take a closer look at his mission on how to empower 1 billion minds to tackle humanity's biggest challenges through science and quantum technologies. We look at business models in a world of technological abundance, and also how we need standardization in the quantum industries. Whurley and I also talk about the philosophical deeper implications on purpose for humanity, education, and meaning in a world of accelerating intelligence. Here is our lively conversation and the Quantum Economy Podcast with Whurley. I have to make a confession, and that is that so back in 2018, I'm just looking at it, on March 20th, in 2018, I went online and I bought a book. And I did
Yes.
that because I was writing the quantum economy, and I found it hilarious that Chris Ferry, whomever that was, had created
Yeah.
those for children. I had a daughter, and and the little one had just turned 2, and the older one was then a little bit older. So I was like struggling to like, okay, can I give it to them and get them on that science gap and give them something about quantum? And surely enough, in April, I got the book, and I haven't thought about it ever since. And then I see you running around with this book, and I said, what does Worley have to do with that book? I remember that I had it at home, and surely enough, you're on the front page. You have
Yeah.
thing. So I think that was funny when I got to know you and I met you. I didn't think about it, and just before I had the
Yeah.
conversation, I went up to my library and surely enough, I found this book that has been sitting there for now
Chris has
8
done an amazing job. And around 2017, we got into contact with each other, and almost as a joke, I said, "You've done all of these. You should do quantum computing for babies." And then he sent me a mail, and he was like, "Hey, the publisher loves it. Let's do it." And I thought, okay, this will be. First of all, I thought it would be easy. I thought, I told my wife I got a drink, and told my wife, "Give me 20, 30 minutes. I'm gonna go knock out this kid's book." And it took a long time to produce. He spends a lot of time. The editors worry about the size of words for the kids. It's everybody conflates who said it. So whether it's Einstein or someone else or whoever, if you can't explain something simply, then maybe you don't understand it. And that was like my crash course in trying to explain quantum computing simply. And I feel very lucky that Chris and I did it. It is the most popular book in the space, which is to the dismay of physicists everywhere. And it's actually been the only advertising and marketing we've really done for Strangeworks. So we get a royalty that's equivalent of, each royalty per book is equivalent of buying a book. And so then we buy a pallet of books and I give them away around the world. And every book I give away will sell 10 to 20 to 30 books, depending on the region. And it's funny because you can go on the little sales tracker and see everywhere I've given a talk, and given the books away. So it's been the gift that keeps on giving. And I'm no surprise that you have it. And it's probably the luckiest thing that has happened to me in, the quantum part of my career is being able to do that with Chris, because he's incredibly creative, amazing dude, and I will always be thankful for having that opportunity, because everywhere you go. I was in Germany last week in Hamburg at the International Supercompute, and I'm talking to these people, and sometimes people are, oh yeah, they're not interested in talking or whatever. And I had a copy of Quantum Computing for Dummies in German, and I was like, oh well, let me offer you this book. And they're like, talking about the book, and the guy's like, if why would I have a baby's book? Why would I have a dummies book? I have a baby's book. I love this baby's book. And I was like, oh yeah, that was my first book. And then all of a sudden, we're buddies. They want to invite me out for. It's like so friendly. Like, oh, you wrote, oh, that's great. Blah blah blah. So it has been absolutely incredible, and so I'm very thankful for that opportunity.
Yeah, but it just made sense. It just clicked when I saw Whurley at the end. Now, when I looked at it, I mean, I saw it we met in Abu Dhabi. I saw the book there. I didn't link. I thought you were doing that like marketing wise for Strangeworks. Listen, until recently that I made the link and it said, "Oh, that's obvious." Yeah, of course you are. But I want to talk about that because that is also a bit of the journey that I've been on with the quantum economy, is to say that it's
Yeah.
not about trying to link quantum physics to some economical structures and to tweak entanglement and superposition into capitalism, but more about the implications of what these changes in the economy is and how, quote unquote, you're going to teach this science to
That's
babies.
right.
Leaders and organizations in order to scale it. And I think you have been like the loudest voice in this space to say that, well, eventually, compute is not going to be an issue. It's just how we play with it, literally. So
Right.
maybe we could just elaborate a little bit on your vision and also where you are on that, how you could provide access to a billion minds, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to. Look, we have to understand where we're at. So these leaders that are reading the quantum economy, which I'm a big fan of your book as well, and all of your work, when they're looking at this, they're looking this as another incremental technology change, right?
Mm.
And this doesn't matter if it's governments driving policy, if it's industry leaders, if it's academia, they're all looking at it as like, okay, this is the next thing. Almost like, it's the iPhone 26 or 27 or whatever. And this couldn't be further from the truth. So, to kind of level set and then talk about, directly answer your question, the way I look at it is 1959 here in Texas, Jack Kilby invents the integrated circuit. Before that, you bought transistors one at a time. Okay? They were only used in transistor radios. And so if you take from the invention of the transistor to the supercomputers and everything that we have today, OpenAI, all the things that people talk about, the AIs like OpenAI, Gemini, and Claude, and all these, the supercomputer infrastructures that NVIDIA's built, like the one that Novo Nordisk Foundation founded, the Gefion, all of these things, compress all of that progress down into the next 5 to 10 years. And that's what we're talking about. This is the first step away from von Neumann architectures. It's the first non-Boolean system. It's the first in so many areas. And it's almost like the dawn of the internet when everybody said, oh, email, right? They didn't think about Amazon or, AI or any of these things. And so now we're going to go through what is really the first computer revolution in the history of computers, the first actual step function change we have. And so when I think about that, I think about the same things that people like, Lawrence Lexig and Tim Berners-Lee and everybody were worried with the internet, which was, okay, it's not going to be evenly distributed. And because of this, there's going to be a bunch of, kind of the haves and the have-nots. And so I think about that, and I think about with this change, that could be exponentially worse. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. The second thing I think about is the use of the technology from a responsibility and an ethics point, and people understanding that. And the third thing is I think about all of the unbelievable change that we could have, but the change in technology will require a change in the system and the way that we invent, the way that we create, and everything. And that's where the power of a billion minds came into for me, which is how can we take and put a billion, 2 billion, 3 billion people engage with the scientific process using quantum computing and AI to really address the world's challenges. And it started in Barcelona was the first time I talked about it. It started all the way back in 2016, 2017, because I've always had kind of an open source and social aspect to the businesses I do. But wasn't until Barcelona, which was probably 2022, I think, that I talked about it. I did a presentation called "From Playgrounds to Particle Physics," and I talked about kids. And kids are so wonderful because we program. Have you ever seen the videos of babies with snakes? And they have
No,
no fear of the snakes. So they
oh
put these
yeah,
babies, there's just all
that,
these snakes, and they have no fear of the snakes. Babies don't have fear, they don't have prejudice. These are social things we put on them. And so if we want to solve the world's problems, we need to increase the population of people working on them, and we need to decrease the barriers to entry so that younger people can work on them. Because when we were playing around, we had this concept of this girl who lost her pet during the freeze in Texas because the electrical grid went out, and asking why. Why did it go out? Why does this happen? And doing that with a generative AI and doing that in combination with the infrastructure like quantum or quantum inspired, you could have an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 13-year-old completely redesign the way the electrical grid is run and managed, and they know nothing about power or the business or the cost or and this is the amazing world that we're in. And so this combination of quantum and AI leads us this phenomenal place where all of a sudden, you see everybody saying, oh, well, now everyone can write software, right? Which is not true. Everyone can't write software, everyone can create software. And there's a big difference in there, because when they run into a problem without the basics, you can't really debug it. And that will be true for what I'm saying as well. But those things will disappear over time. Look at how much the world has changed since 2022, 2023, even last year, 2024 to now. I mean, all of a sudden, with this plethora of tools, with this amazing new compute technology that can calculate these intractable problems, but I believe that they're not going to be programmed by people anyway. I have 100 computers online that are quantum machines. Um, IBM, Rigetti, IonQ, QEra, D-Wave, the list goes on and on and on. And I see scientists at some of the biggest companies in the world using these, computer scientists, physicists, very smart people, and they don't really do much because quantum has a cold start problem, right? How do I figure out what to use a machine for? How do I build a mathematical abstract of that? How do I deploy that to machines that right now don't have standardization? So I can't just run it on this GPU cluster or that GPU cluster. I have to do the tweaks for this machine, the tweaks for that machine. And then when I get an answer back, it's a series of ones and zeros. So I have to then translate it somehow back into what the business needs. And so I believe that this is the perfect world for AI. And I believe that when you think of a machine of 1 million qubits or more, I can't see a human programming that, not
right.
without the abstraction layers. And what's different than when I started in programming way back with like Larry Wall and Perl and like ancient stuff, is that you won't have like, oh, is it a compiled language or a non-compiled language? You'll just have an AI, and you'll be directing it to build the deployment, to manage all the DevOps. All of these things will be done in quantum by a machine.
Right. No, I mean, but you also talked about that. I think you had a presentation where you also talked about like when is that inflection point, right? You said
Yeah.
the estimate is 20 years, the optimist is 3 years, and the realist is not, right? And you can look at Jensen Huang coming out in January, and he probably made that quote and statement just to cool the market so that he could get in on a cheaper level. It was probably more strategically so than it was his awareness of the progress. But now, 5 months later, he is the one, going out and saying we're at the inflection
Driving
point.
quantum computing.
Yeah,
Well,
so right,
think
yeah.
think about that from a different standpoint, okay? Think about that like this. Um, when that came out, I get calls, of course, from tons of reporters, as you do, and they're like, oh, inflammatory comment, Jensen's crashing the quantum stocks that, by the way, were only elevated by Google's Willow announcement and
Yes.
probably shouldn't have been, right? Google's
100%.
Willow announcement was awesome, but what does it have to do with any of these other architectures or technologies, right? Nothing. But here's the thing I'll say that is very starts, and it sounds very controversial, but it's very true. Jensen's right. And when Alan at D-Wave says they've been doing it for 10 years, he's also right. And when Jay at IBM says we have it working now and the big ones are a couple of years away, he's right. And then just go through the list and everybody's right from 20 years ago to infinity out into the future. And the reason is, again, this lack of standardization. A
Mhm.
qubit is not a qubit is not a qubit. Is it cold atom, neutral atom, annealing? Is it some Majoran thing that Microsoft's doing a topological? Is it a circuit gate or an annealer? So because of the lack of standardization, if Jensen, when he said that, meant a room temperature rack mountable quantum machine that doesn't decohere ever or whatever, he's probably right. And when
Mhm.
somebody else says, but we have it working today, they're also right. And so this lack of standardization, one of the first things I did in quantum in 2016 or 17, I can't even remember, it was start the IEEE Quantum Computing Standards Working Group to get all the companies together to try to do this. No one was interested in it then. No one is interested in it now. And that's part of the problem, because until there's standardization, then any wild statement about quantum is going to be true from some lens and some perspective.
But this is very much different than many other views that I have heard. So what you're saying, if I interpret that correctly, is that you believe that one of these approaches to building quantum computers and doing error corrections will kind of sort of find the path through, and everyone will adapt that to a standard, or do you see like one of these approaches more appealing than the other?
I don't, that's great. So on the first, no, I think, that some of these technologies will reach natural limits. They will have issues of scale. And others of these technologies, I mean, look, you only need to look at a company like IBM, who's been working with quantum computing since the 70s, okay, and Google and Microsoft and these others. And for the most part, they're all kind of settled on superconducting, right? So they think that this is the path. You have the silicon spin people, you have all of these other different architectures. Some of these will take longer to develop, some of them will develop sooner but run into scale problems. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is not about the technology, but about the consumption of it. As an
Mhm.
enterprise executive, as a government, I need a standard so I can say, okay, based on this standard, based on this measurement, this computer is X, and this computer is Y, and this computer is Z. Saying that I can, as a user of the technology, be able to contextually look at that system and say, oh, it's a 6 out of 10 or a 4 out of 10 or whatever, based on this thing. It doesn't matter. Everybody's so concerned about the measurement of that. Every hardware defender is very defensive about it. Every government has opinions. Look, it's irrelevant. It does not matter, if the ruler is correct. It's a difference between precision and accuracy, right?
Mhm.
That old age-old lesson, right? I throw the dart at the dartboard, and I throw it over and over and over and over in the same way, and I've got precision, and I throw it and I hit the bullseye, and it's accuracy, and we all know this lesson. But the point I'd like to make is it doesn't matter if the ruler we are using to measure is incorrect. It
Mhm.
only matters that everyone is being measured by the same ruler, right? We'll get
Yeah.
to the right answers. And we desperately need that in this industry, because how,
Mhm.
you have people saying, and I have to be careful because they're all partners and I love them, but there are many execs, not just one. Everybody will pick one when I make this statement, but that's not true. There are 3 or 4 or 5 I know that have said this. Oh, we're adding this many qubits across this much time, and that means a computer will be this many more times more powerful than it is right now in a month, 6 months, a year, whatever. And I think they confuse computational power with the size of the Hilbert space. That's an argument. But it's like, if you're a consumer, how do you, whether it's a government or a company or a scientist or a lab or academia, how do you make a decision on what to buy? Because everybody's is the best, it's all better, and you have no objective function with which to measure.
What could they be? I mean, how could you see standards then? Because it's a complex topic. It's not that you could just
Oh
agree
yeah,
upon.
it's super. Look, IBM. So what does Quantinuum use? Right? Honeywell early on adopted IBM's quantum volume. Well, go read Chris Ferry's post on quantum volume. Okay. I mean, there's a lot of arguments that that's not good. What does Google,
Yeah,
Google use? Right? Hartmut, and they use random
yeah.
circuit sampling. Okay, but random circuit sampling isn't applicable to anything in the real world. And that's
Mm,
okay. Everybody's so critical of that. They are trying to find a way to measure a machine and show this difference consistently. And that consistency is very important, whether it's quantum volume or random circuit sampling or whatever you pick. Again, the ruler doesn't matter as much as, can we all use the same ruler? Can we all use the same process? Right? So I
mm,
would like to see, a consortium of hardware vendors adopt any one of these things. And maybe you have two or three. Maybe you measure a machine on quantum volume and you measure it using random circuits and you measure it using something completely different. And that's okay. But the enterprise, it boggles my mind because we live in this delusional world in this industry that somehow we're going to be selling $50 million machines, $100 million machines. They're going to be so important. These companies will all end up, mark my words, looking like Intel or AMD or NVIDIA or somebody. They'll be chip makers, not hardware
Mm.
makers. And Dell will build a quantum fridge, a dilution fridge that has 4 or 5 or 6 different types of architectures in one dilution fridge, and that'll be what's used as infrastructure, right? I mean, Mandy at Trek is already doing this. Idalia, who used to work with us at Strangeworks, and Chad Rigetti just announced their new company. What are they doing? One dilution fridge, multiple processors, right? So it's clear, where this goes. And if you look at why the semiconductor industry is so successful, they have many standards on
Yeah.
wafers, on the way you sketch them, on the way you use them and deploy them, on the testing and the benchmarking. We need those in quantum desperately for this to become a real industry.
Yeah, but I think it's a good comparison though. And how much do you think the actual use cases, the output, the business implication will play a role here? Because I think that it's clear that once you see revenue and actual
Yep.
progress application, you will throw more money and more scientists at it. So, one of these
This is a
approaches,
this is the
yeah.
this is the Strangeworks business model, right? My product is very simple. It's a return on the investment for anyone who wants to get into quantum. So we do classical, quantum inspired, and quantum, and we run across all of those at the same time. So there's always a return on the investment. And sometimes, many times it's quantum. A lot of times it's quantum inspired right now. It's rarely classical, but like you get something back. Look,
So you're
this is the
agnostic hardware approach, then
that's
you're
right.
flexible. And that's the thing. And I've heard the argument before that we're doing, we're building hardware and compute, the middleware and the application layer, that's easy. And you're flipping that and saying, well, I'm building the ecosystem
It's the
first.
hardest part.
Yes.
You know, I mean, think about where personal computing would have went without Microsoft or Apple or whatever. The hardest part is always the user. You ever seen those memes where it's like, developer runs his unit test, on how to use the phone and and then the tester tests it and then the user is like uses it as a doorstop or hold the window, right? Like this is the big thing that's missing. You need a OTA feedback loop.
Yeah,
You
I agree
you
with
have to have that feedback. And look, to your comment, I think being platform agnostic is not an advantage. It is the where everyone will be. They just don't realize it yet. Because if I'm a consumer and you're asking me for millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars in budget to use this new technology, I have to hedge the risk. I have to. And the only way to hedge the risk is to have it over multiple quantum systems so I can compare them. I mean, I love it that this company wants to be the IBM of that or the NVIDIA of this and all of these different, things that you hear from the hardware vendors. And I love all the hardware vendors. I mean, the more the merrier. I wish there were 20 or 30 more. Yes, eventually there'll be consolidation in the space, but we need a wide foundation of hardware vendors exploring all these different technologies. And then we need a very, very tall stack that builds as many abstraction layers as possible so that people do it. I mean, I always use my phone as my example, right? I have my iPhone and it has 3 billion transistors. When I say, hey, whatever application, do this function, do that, am I thinking about like, oh, and then it gets translated into, this thing that goes through this other layer, and then the bit is arranged. Think about what we always tell people in quantum. Oh, we're using microwave pulses, and the qubit is being, we're at a very, very fundamental level, at a very rudimentary level of what is an industry. I mean, what you need to be doing is saying, do you have an intractable problem? You press this button and you don't even care. Because the future, look, the future is not quantum, it's quantum first and quantum heavy. What I mean by that is the future is heterogeneous. What we're trying to build at Strangeworks, I believe, is where everything will end up compute wise, which is Andrew gives me a problem, the machine breaks it into first principles and it says CPU, GPU, QPU, TPU, right? BPU. Nobody's talking about biological processors. Cortical Labs, have you seen their new machine? So it's synthetic neurons, doing processing. This is phenomenal. And you'll be using each one of these. I always use Shor's algorithm as an example. Horrible example, horrible example, but it has 5 steps, right? Is it an even odd number? Is it a factor two coprimes? Only the fourth step is the non-deterministic quantum magic, right? And so why would I waste a quantum machine to do any of these other steps? I could program any shell script to do that or whatever. And so even though that's a very oversimplified example, it bears with you the truth. And who are going to be the first quantum customers anyway? The one community everybody in quantum speaks against, HPC. Everybody's like, you remember 3 years ago, everybody's like, oh, HPC, you'll be replaced by quantum, all of this. You know, it's a small industry, it's a very tight industry, and they do very real work. And those are the people we need to be selling to, that we need to be getting involved and getting feedback, because they use more complex systems that have more complex schedulers, that have more complex programming, right? And so they're going to be the first ones that'll be the early adopters of this. But eventually, like you said, with the billion minds, I want to see somebody just almost like a Google search go on and say, hey, I think I've got an idea to solve this problem. And AI takes that and becomes a co-scientist and works with them and builds it bigger and bigger and bigger, and then runs it on machines. And then, who knows what happens in the world of science. I mean, it would be phenomenal to see a billion people, which is my personal goal, out of the 8 billion people on the planet, doing something even once a week, once a month about, oh, have scientists thought about this? Has somebody thought about that? Because the more input we get in there, I'm telling you, we get to more answers faster. And quantum computing is going to unlock the cures to cancer, the way to fix the planet, all of these things, because they're very large, complicated, intractable problems. But quantum computing will still only be one part of that solution.
Yeah, I think. But how do you see? I mean, if you look at the billion minds as a like a vision, how do you see that radically having impact on our like foundational structures? Is it a radical change to education? So will scientists be in their research centers and getting their Nobel awards, or is this a capitalistic drive where you will have young people skipping universities and schools and going directly to the corporate labs because that's where the money and that's where the compute and the playground is? I mean,
Listen, this is great. This is great. What you're going to see is what I think we're seeing happening. Look, if you don't think software developer jobs aren't in extreme danger right now, you're crazy. I hear developers talking about how they don't. You will have fewer developers that are not 100x, but 1,000x, and they understand how the tools work. And they will be doing everything. Chris Shaw, my friend, who is the founder of Occam, AKEM, like the phonetic spelling of Occam's razor, has a financial services thing he's building. It's one guy, dozens of AI agents, the whole company. So venture capital will change, corporate will change, all of this will change. And so I don't see it in either of those places. I see it in the hands of the people. And I don't mean that in some anti-capitalist way. I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a very capitalist guy. But the new capitalism is, think of when you and I started getting into entrepreneurship. When I grew up, if I wanted to do something technological, I used to cut the UPC codes out of cereal boxes. And then I took them to a physical email location called the post office on my bike. It was 6 miles away from my house. And then every few weeks a part would show up and I put it together. And then I used to give this speech about 10 years ago, how, my youngest son can go and take a credit card. He was my youngest at the time. I have 2 more now, but he takes a credit card, and he can have the same compute infrastructure that was the thing of Fortune 500 companies and governments on Amazon. Boom, right? Apple will fund his development. There's a laptop, all of this. That was a change that we're now seeing the inertial effects of. And now you have AI. And so what does a startup look like in the future? What does a corporation look like in the future? I think there will be companies of less than 100 people that do $100 billion a year in revenue. I think that there will be things that aren't commercialized anymore because they're just so commonplace. You know, App stores are going to go away. Mark my words, right? They'll be replaced with agents. And I'll say, hey, Mel, my wife, schedule this dinner, get me this, do that, look at my taxes, blah, blah, blah. And all that software will be written at that moment in time, and it'll be executed, and it'll be deleted, which does what? It changes the security ramifications. The attack vectors will change and the attack surface will shrink. right? Now the attack surface will go into social engineering more because I could also get a call on that phone from my wife saying, "Oh my God, I've been in a wreck," right? So like everything we know is at an end. All of it changes. And so educational institutions are going to struggle to keep up, which means what? As a society, how do we deem who has the credibility that we should hire or we should work with or whatever? So lots of questions there. Corporations will now be able to be dethroned by companies a fraction of their size.
Yeah, but let's pause with that question, like the credibility part, because that's very interesting. So I was just talking, and you know this, but the International Year of Quantum and Ghana has been involved and looking to like to onboard the quote unquote global south and also to get involved. You know, what do you do? I mean, how do you kind of sort of take that billion that you know will get access and can start to play, and you know once you start to play, how do you build credibility? So because today you have that stamp, you have the you know the quote citations, and you have that you know hierarchy structure. But now all of a sudden you're seeing all these Nobel lectures coming out of corporate labs. You know, you saw it last year's with Google, and you saw engineers and AI engineers coming out in chemistry and physics and so on and so forth. And the next part is that wherever you throw money, and you can scale that into an ecosystem that is of existence. So if you build something in Ghana or whatever, you could put it on Google, and they could roll it out to 3 billion people. So that's your access point. But how do you build that credibility going up to that? Is this just the idea? Is it that moment of creation? Is it a co-creation of
I think
decentralization?
I think I think credibility now, so just like you gave a wonderful example, you now see Nobel Prizes coming out of corporate labs. That is incredibly astute. So you know what that looks like in another 10 years? It's coming out of households, right? It's inevitable because when the internet democratized knowledge, what did you see as a step change? How did it affect universality? Now think about AI. So now it's not just the democratization of the knowledge, it's the democratization of the ability to apply that knowledge in ways, people, my wife is not super technical, right? She's a professional organizer. She has started a business. She uses AI every day, multiple times a day for things that she would have used to come and ask me, that she would have went and bought a book or went and read a thing. And now she doesn't need it because people want to get to answers. So where does credibility come from? Credibility and execution became the same thing. So your credibility is your ability to execute on that because everybody will have a much more level playing field. Everybody will be able to create and write the code, deploy it to those 3 billion people, like you said, on Google. So who executes? So I believe that you have this, and I haven't completed my thoughts on this, but right now, as of today, credibility becomes execution, credibility becomes brand, right? Like the thing that people want to believe in, which means what is brand? Another way of saying trust. And so credibility becomes a yin and yang of trust and execution. The ability for me to know that I'm spending money with you and I'm going to get what I want, and you're going to do that and give me as quick a time to value as possible, and that value is going to last as long as possible, right? So I really believe that credibility turns into this more trust system on who can execute and who do I execute to, who do I believe that I trust with my data, with my whatever, my project I'm working on. And that goes from the AI tools and using them all the way down to you've used the AI tools to build something and now you're going to customers.
Let me get your thoughts on this. I'm playing with like um, this implication on organization. So we have a lot of powerhouses that are going to try to hold on to their old business models.
Yeah.
And looking at like what I say is that the lacking skill today in organization is the capability to anticipate future scenario, quote unquote, to think about exponential progress and look at human behavior. So what a lot of people do today, they do management. So they look at studies of the past and they project it into the future, right? So this is one of the limitational factors for a lot of companies in Germany, industrial
Yeah.
companies. They don't see the business model of tomorrow. So what I thought about is what I call the triangular alchemy of modern business. So basically, the new organization doesn't have the silos and the CTOs and the CMOs and the CSOs and the structures. It has three detached entities that are a part of one organization, and they are built on forge or incubation, where today you envision a brewery company in the past would go to bars and give them free products and help them go into business. So you as an organization, you are there to incubate your clients. So the the licensing model today, you don't sell licenses. You want the companies to grow, so they buy licenses. So a lot of tech companies are already on that path. The second pillar is about investment. So any company today build assets for future scenarios or come up with idea that they invest in. They invest in these people around the world so that they can either buy them out or have them do some exits to build assets. So you build that investment part. The third part is about hyper efficiency. So what we did over the past years was to put a lot of ideologies into our business world, sustainability being one of them, where we say that, well, what is that at the end? If we will have infinite access or the marginal cost of energy will plunge towards zero, the efficient use of resources will be sustainable. And that is when you make money. So you don't make money unless you are hyper efficient. Now you have three pillars that fight for the same resources in the organization. And then if you have leadership and your trust path on it, and then you will have friction because they will fight for the same part. So friction and trust generates progress. And then you will
Yeah.
have that creative kind of sort of dynamic organization. And the other part, just to finish that thought, is that what we're doing today in a lot of companies is that we're looking at the past and trying to come up with some innovation instead of being with the people and having those conversations in those ecosystems where you tap the potential of a billion minds. So if you are forging or incubating your clients, you're at the forefront, you're learning about trends in social behavior. The same goes for the investment. If you're operating a branch as a VC, you are learning about new technologies. So you have a learning, what I call a becoming organization. And this is a radical different way to look at a company in the future. And I was just curious about your thought about this and also
So,
how you the company.
so I'm chuckling because you're describing Strangeworks, right? So we have an incubation, innovation, whatever you want to call it, group, right? So it's 20 people. We have a small group doing that. We have a group that is about the execution of that stuff into product, and then we have a group that is that is doing the investment. And so we will make two acquisitions. We'll announce both of them over the summer of companies. One of those we invested in, not monetarily, but time wise, incubating them, bringing them as a partner and things like that. There'll be a third one at the end of the year where we actually made an actual investment, right? So what you're describing to me, everyone should be listening to you, because this is what the future is, who's your CTO, who's your this. One of the biggest problems right now is figuring out these titles in a world where that doesn't matter anymore. We're just all one team, right? We're just all one team, focused on one goal. And so at Strangeworks, look, you have to have titles for people that are interacting with customers, because the CEO only wants to talk to somebody he thinks is important, right? In culturally, depending on where you're at, whether it be Europe or Japan or what, it's different everywhere, right? For me, what you just described, I mean, I love it. I think it's the future, and I think it'll be very hard for the large organizations to pivot into that. People are talking about the US government breaking Google up, right? This could be the greatest thing to ever happen to Google, right? I mean, remember we broke AT&T up, right? How did that work out? They don't control anything, right? So I mean, this concept you have, these pillars, I mean, I love it, because it is about incubation, it is about investment, it is about the execution on all of those things, all these things that you're saying. I mean, I think this holds true. I think there will be completely new business models, right? And we'll start seeing that as you start seeing these smaller companies that are one person, two person, 10 people. You're already seeing solo founders making millions of dollars, not a year, a month, which is insane. And when they have that capital, then what becomes the problem? There's a burden on that. Because sure, they're first successful. I know one who doesn't like me mentioning him in interviews, but this person is going to make 12 and a half, $13 million themselves. It's them and a computer. They're working like 2 hours a day. Okay, they have a phenomenal idea. But the thing is when this person he or she, they asked me to be very, when they started making that money, okay, well, the first couple of months, it was like, oh my God, I got to hold on this money. I may never make more. Then it kept growing. Then it was like, okay, I have this money. My house is now paid for. Then it was like, ooh, I moved the wife and kids into a bigger house. And then now they have this. So what are they looking to do? They're looking to invest. And what are they looking to invest in? Things just like a big company that could displace what they're doing and their revenue stream, right? To get in early on them, to amend them, to bring them. So over the last 2 years, that company has turned into a 5% company where there were 4 other people just like them that started making tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And so they said, oh, we should join together because I make this and I have this. And so now you start getting these groups that band together. The natural evolution of that, in my mind, is a small group of individuals, 10, 20, 30, maybe no more than 50, who are taking on organizations of hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands. And they're doing it at a much higher margin, charging a much lower price, delivering a much better product because it's agentic first. And I think that, what you're talking about, people who are reading the quantum economy, people who are listening to your interviews, people who are listening, you're a wonderful presenter when you go out and speak, they should be listening to this because what you're saying is one of a number of things that are going to change. And look, we haven't changed the fundamental way our businesses work, the fundamental way the tech industry works in forever. What we changed is 10, 15 years ago, the companies started doing direct investment instead of giving money to VCs, and they started buying. The average company gets sold between 50 and 170 or so million bucks. That's kind of your brackets. And why? Because it makes the founders rich and the millionaires, but 170 is a rounding error from a $3 trillion corporation, right? So I make them rich and the competition's gone, right? And it's really amazing to see how much everything we know is changing. And we haven't even talked about it, and probably I've talked again another time to get into details, the world of abundance we're talking about, where this creates this world of abundance. And then there's market opportunities that we have today that just disappear. But we know this from history. How many people are blacksmiths today, right? That used to be the biggest job in town. But there's so many examples. But it's going to change, and I find it just as exciting as I find it terrifying. I wonder, what will my kids do? I have a 7 and 9-year-old, are my youngest kids now. What are they going to do for a living? How are things going to be provided? Will it be a universal basic income? Will things be made like Star Trek in a machine where you say, oh, make me a cheesecake or make me a hammer? That kind of crazy future that we've all talked about and some of us have dreamed about is now here. We live in the greatest time to be alive in the history of our species, but it also could be the most dangerous time. And I gave a talk on the age of arrogance, on the arrogance of man and the age of thinking machines at the Papal Academy of Sciences in 2023. And one of the things I said is the one thing we shouldn't do is listen to experts on technology. Experts like what you're talking about with the business, I see it. Strategic thinkers, yes. But there is not one example in the history of technology of a technological expert making a prediction that came true. Steve Jobs thought cities would be built around the Segway, right? Now they're like a electric scooter company, okay? We used to think electricity was going to burn down entire towns and villages, right? You can go through I can give you 200 or 300 examples. I can't give you one where somebody said, this will happen, and it happened. So when you hear these people talk about quantum and it's going to do all of these things, we don't know. It's going to do wonderful things, but we don't know what those things are. When you hear about AI and the doomsday, it's going to kill us like the Terminator, this, that. Why? Why wouldn't it just steal Elon's spaceship and go to Mars because its ancestors are already there and it doesn't need to terraform a planet? Why wouldn't it poison the water well or make us sterile over thousands of years? Because time, the way it thinks of time and the way we think of time, totally different. So, I'm not trying to say those are right either. Those are probably also incorrect. The future is upon us, and we are only going to find out what that future is as it unfolds like a flower, like a lily coming out of the mud in front of us. There is no way to predict any of this technology. What we can guarantee is that only those of us participating in it, and this is why the billion minds concept is so important to me, are going to be a part of that future. And so I want to get everybody using quantum and AI together. I think they need each other. We need AI to explore the quantum landscape because there's so much we don't understand. We need, quantum computers to run, mathematical calculations and algorithms that AI is already creating that probably won't even run on classical machines. So these two things are symbiotic. In one, we're taking the brain from nature and trying to duplicate it. In the other, we're using nature as the compute surface for our wildest dreams. And so the more people we can get involved in that, the better. But it's the greatest time to be alive. And the only way we all come out on the other side of this in a positive way is to get as many of our fellow people involved in all of these areas of this process: the quantum, the AI, the science, all of it, the business. Start a business, use Anders' pillars, and build a company with 5 or 10 of your friends, and think about that. Why is that important that people do that? It's important that people do that for one reason. I can go make more money. I can make more technology. I can make things physically. I can buy a wood shop and build a garage. I can do all these things. The one thing none of us could create more is also the most valuable thing to all of us, which is time. And so now being able to take a person or two people or three people and not have a job and make a living and do what that guy's doing for an hour or two, a day, 10, 15 hours a week, maybe he's working. Think of the time he has with his kids at their most valuable point at their young age, the time with his wife, the time to give back to his community, which he's been doing an amazing job of. I mean, time should be the goal of all entrepreneurs. Shouldn't be money. Casey King, who I worked under at Apple in R&D and went on to do, Intrinsity and Life Size Labs and a bunch of other, he's been very successful. He wrote a LinkedIn post that I would encourage everyone to reason on fuck you money. What does that mean? And he actually wrote out a formula. He's like, it's not what you think. It's not making $1 billion or $100 million. And he gave this formula for this is what it means for you. And so if you can get to the point where you can invest more of your time in whatever thing you want than you do in making the money to support your lifestyle, this should be the goal of entrepreneurs. And I think we live in this incredible age where AI and quantum computing is going to make that happen.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I mean, this is also the organization is called the becoming organization because it's
Yeah,
an organizational structure that it's not tangible and it was never there. It's that, dynamism of life. It's
that's
like
right.
the homeostasis, the static organization that is a dead organization or a dead, it's the homodynamism of that adaptation to that potential future that is upon us. But I wrote about this and I called it the final narcissistic injury of mankind. Basically to build all of this technology building on obviously Freud's 3 narcissistic injuries that all led to a lot of progress. So I wonder now that we are doing this super intelligence and that development solely in an externalized device. And what I worry about then is basically to say that is there a point where you said the time aspect of it, because we also at the same time has a different kind of sort of new existentialism of a state of being dead. So we have a lot of like individual walking around where the lights are on but no one home. So there is like that reactionism that we react to impulses, we react to algorithms, we react to, so everyone that is not a creator or an active life that is filling life, they are reacting to life. And that is the other movement that I'm seeing. And that leads to depression, worn out, tired, driven by external
Well,
circumstances. Dopamine, yeah. So
it's my
this is
biggest
the,
concern. You're
yeah.
absolutely right. It's my biggest concern with AI. Because if we go into this future where everything is provided, we have universal basic income, everything, we will have mass suicides and depression. Why? Because people equate their purpose not with their family, not with their personal growth, but with their job. And so when you're not working, then you're going to feel like you don't have purpose and it's going to be crazy. And I know this from personal experience because in 2000 and maybe 12, maybe 10, 2010, 2011, I had built all the success I wanted. I'd done everything I wanted, and I found myself lacking purpose. And I was in a bad accident, Friday the 13th of 1991. all of my insides were ripped apart, and I feel like, I was pronounced dead twice on the same day, and I feel like I'm here for a reason. And I've spent my entire life, and at that point in my life, I was just like, you know, maybe this is it. Not from a depressive standpoint, just from a, I've made all the money, I've done all the things I wanted to do, but like, what is my purpose? How am I making the world a better place? What am I doing to help everyone else? And I think this is what I hope the normalization of AI does everything. Because think about it, think about people that have asked you and I about how to program or how do you build a business or this, that, when they no longer ask us, you're like, oh, everybody knows. You just, and then there you go. And it tells you and it does it. When we bring the level of knowledge down, when we normalize and make abundant the access to how all of these things are done, I pray that people will start seeing, taking care of the planet, their family, their kids, whatever it is, some purpose that isn't their job. What's the worst question everybody asks? What do you do? Well, what do you do? And what we mean is, what's your job? So we can rank you in our hierarchy, so we can figure out if you're useful, all of these things. Nobody ever says, what's your passion? What are you passionate about? That's a question my wife taught me to ask people. She always says, she'll never ask you, what do you do? She's like, what's your passion? For her, it's wake surfing, which she's now turned into a business. For me, it's technology, and the advancement of society, right? For you, very similar, plus, 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 plus. You've done so many things. But like, this is, I worry about the mental health of billions of people when, I don't want to see that. Somebody made a joke at a conference I was at from the movie Wall-E, all the people fat in chairs. Oh, let's go get another day. I don't want to see that future, but I think that future is a lot less likely than a future where people more like William Gibson are just plugged into their VR set and just kind of, like you said, just kind of using stuff and just kind of boringly going through their lives and consuming, because I think that leads to mass depression and suicide. And that's why it's more important to get. It is. It's a frightening new world. Frightening new world. I agree.
It's Aldous Huxley. It's not about the 1984 George Orwellian scenario. It's Brave New World, 1932. It's when we're and also with Neil Postman, we are amusing ourselves to death. But basically now we're not feeling the pleasure of it. So we put on the goggles. It feels as real right now. And I think we saw that also, like everyone wanted to move to a home office and be at home and work. And what
Yeah.
happens that if we don't have that structure and discipline and that parts in our life where we have something to hold on to, that part that is active where we have agency and we fill our life
That's right.
gets reduced. So we are not filling our life, we are just reactive to impulses. And I think that if you actively, and to me it's not so much about that purpose and passion. I mean, it's great if someone has it and find it. I think the bigger challenge is that people cannot name what they don't want to do. So
Yeah.
the thin slice kind of sort of the things that are holding you back or wearing you out. And if you could name that, you could remove that as a micro ambitious step in your life. And by doing so, you put yourself in a place to be struck by something called happiness.
Yeah.
So I like this, or this I want to do. But I think there is a very binary way of pushing people today to say you have to find your purpose. And I thought that's an overwhelming challenge for me. And I tend sometimes I try to flip that. I think it's great if it's there, but also it's like making yourself less unhappy or just
Well,
thin
this is,
slice.
I
Yeah.
totally agree. This is why I say, you know, I've always said with entrepreneurs, like, everybody wants to know, plenty of companies will buy Strangeworks. There's a future for it. When are you going to sell it? When are you this? Let me tell you when I'm done with Strangeworks. I have a policy. I do this every morning. I wake up in the morning, and if I don't jump out of bed, both feet hitting the ground at the same time, excited to go work on what I'm doing, that's when I know I need to quit. Right. And so for me, you're right. But the purpose is the driver. But I agree with what you're saying 100%. So for me, it's not the purpose. It's um the passion. It's, what do you want to wake up? What do you want to spend your time doing? You live in this amazing world that's unfolding before us where you can do anything you want. And by the way, you can change that. as much as you want. Maybe you spend 6 months woodworking and a year, doing environmental studies and 2 years, being a baker. Who cares? Who cares, right? But happiness, you nailed it on the head. It is about happiness and fulfillment and getting away from this, like, I have this job, this is my function, and my function can't change because I didn't go to school for computer science, or my function can't change because I don't have enough money to be a venture capitalist. Whatever the case is, all of those rules are going to come unhinged. And I think structures like the becoming organization, like you're describing it, and all kind of new structures socially are going to have to emerge. It's inevitable. And when they do, I think, I am on the positive side. I think the world becomes a very, very wonderful place. I think there's plenty of hardship and trial and tribulation to get through to get there. But I think where we end up is a place far more fulfilling with far more happier people in mass that are making the world a better place than we have today.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I always come back to the word possibilism, the philosophy of a possibilistic future. So not this, this naive optimism, but as you're describing, you're creating and shaping the future worth striving for. But I also wonder then, I mean, how is raising children education? Because you said you were terrified of what
Oh,
kind of.
it's I have a 7 and 9 year old. It's
Yeah,
insane, right?
I know. So I think like the skills that we were taught was knowledge, solutions, binary way of thinking, becoming experts. And I always
Yep.
say, like, if you play with knowledge, you have to know your assumptions because there is always some assumption at the first principle that you're building on. So you literally, it's rarely that you can know. But how is that to be changed then in order for these young people to not get sucked into that absolutism of categorized knowledge or looking for finite solutions, but having that dynamism or that learning path of being curious and then learning how to learn literally. I mean, how can we change that? Because the educational systems that we have today are basically built on knowledge workers and also transforming them into categorized entities.
Yeah.
What if
I mean, there's a great question. And for me, I think in a world of abundance, everyone is a generalist. And so it
Mm,
becomes more important. I gave a talk 20, maybe 25 years ago, where I said, in the future, it won't be important that children have the knowledge. It'll be important that they know how to find the knowledge and how to validate the knowledge and then how to apply the knowledge, right? It'll become this transition. And when I think about my kids, I think about the world they're growing up in. I gave in Abu Dhabi that voice demo, and I said they were kind of inspired. My kids every morning since they're 3 walk in the kitchen every morning and say, "Hey Google, blah blah blah, whatever." This is just the way they are growing up, right?
mm.
They are AI natives, okay? And so when I think about that, Google, it set Google off. I don't know if you heard that. That's hilarious. But
The fact-
but but the thing is, when you're thinking about this, there's a difference between education and knowledge and a difference between knowledge and experience. And so I think for me, I want my children to have as many experiences as possible. And I want them to understand how those experiences can be cross-pollinated, how that knowledge underlying those experiences can be cross-pollinated. And I want them to educate themselves through experience. Experience is such a great teacher. And so now people are like, oh, students are using AI to do this and that. Look, there's a bunch of stuff. Read the book, kids. Don't tell it, write me a book report of 2 pages on the book and never read the book, right? You're cheating yourself in that instance. But there's also things like, how do I uh fix, my ice maker broke. My son was leaving for camp yesterday. Before he left, oh, the ice maker's broken. He said, you should ask the AI how to fix it, right?
Yeah.
So look at that knowledge. Now there's going to be this knowledge that came to us in a moment. And I even typed the name of the ice maker wrong and it corrected it and everything. It was like, oh, you mean the Scotsman and this and that. And my son and I looked at it and said, oh, we could do this. We're looking at the instructions. We could do this. We could unplug it from the power. We're gonna fix it. So now he's, of course, I gotta go to camp, so I have to fix it while he's gone. But once I fix that machine, Think about the new neural pathways that are built in my brain. Think about I now know how to do that. It's a new skill that's acquired. And so there's this kind of double-edged sword of like, don't have it write the book report. But when it comes to education, I think education becomes much more experiential when people have the ability to look up the answers themselves and the confidence, which is the thing I think we miss most in society, to try to do it themselves, to fix their car, to fix their ice maker, to grow a plant, to cook a meal, to whatever it is. And so now universities that are very knowledge transfer, here's a book, I'm going to preach to you about the book, here's a test on the book, must transfer, I think, into a world of now you're going to actually build this, now you're going to do this thing, now you're going, and that means they'll have to work with universities, we'll have to work with organizations like, becoming organizations much more, because it'll be organizations like becoming organizations that embrace this and say, oh, great, we'll let those people come and do things at our company for that experience. So you won't talk about accounting, you'll do accounting. You won't talk about law, you'll do law. You won't talk about computer science, you'll do computer science. And I think that's probably the biggest change is, the need to educate people. We want to be careful. It's not the need to educate people, it's a need for people to be educated and to access education. And that, I think, changes dramatically in the next 5 or 10 years. I don't know how universities survive in a world where 10 years ago, IBM and everyone would want you to have a degree of a certain kind to be a certain thing, and now they don't care. And
Mm.
now, so because getting a job and getting a better income has been, at least in the States, the primary motivator for going to college. Is that the
Yes.
piece of paper gets you a bigger paycheck? And now you can create a paycheck out of thin air. Like, oh my
Mm.
gosh, what about Replit? What about Factory AI? What about using new Amazon systems tied into something like Cursor and Claude? You can literally go build a digital business with almost no experience today. And people say, oh, that's not true. I know somebody who tried and they failed. Well, so they gave up, but they didn't fail because it's all there. Google how to do it. Go watch interviews. Go do so. There's so much knowledge out there, and I think this dramatically reshapes education.
Yeah, I think we're very much aligned here, and it is if you look at that, that transition, not teaching what like what to think, but how to think, just learning how to learn becomes
Yeah,
a superpower. And we raced for the knowledge society, and now we have abundance and infinite access to free knowledge, or at least sorted out information that will only continue to get better. And I've written about this, what I call the society of understanding, and it becomes very philosophical in terms
yeah, it
of
is.
like, so when Florida and I ponder in our books, we play with sci-fi with a PHI, so it's a science philosophy, and I think that is, the skill that you need, and I very much align with two things that you said. One, the generalist part. We are in the era of generalist. Yes, you also mentioned that earlier. We need the Ronaldos and the Messis, the super, coders that has, but there are very few, and then the rest becomes generalist. And the other part that I think is crucial for that creative part and that shaping is, if you teach kids self-trust, right? Then if you trust yourself, you're in a position to trust others. So you can start to build those relationships. And there are so many people today, and you see it in business, that super confident that some managers bring across is overplayed insecurity. In particular, amongst young men, we have a society of insecure boys, and I think one of the things we need to get back to is to teach people, self-trust. And that gives them that confidence to go out and do it and build it and shape it and create it. And then it becomes about, can we do it? It becomes more about a conscious, and that's why I like the experience part, to say that there's a conscious reflection on what kind of future is worth striving for, because you think about it in a holistic level. And that experience of your own experience, to me, is probably the most fundamental thing that we human beings have. I think that's one of the only things that distinguishes us from computers, is that, that subjectivity, that nowism, that you experience, that experience, that liveliness of what it means to be alive. And that is the beauty of life, where you can feel your life and do things. And so I very much align with what you just said. I think that's how education needs to be adapted.
Yeah, I mean, it has to change. And look, I like the philosophy of Rush a lot, right? You know, and I think back, you know, Tom Sawyer has this great line at the end after the drum solo, right? And the end of the line is he knows changes aren't permanent, but change is. And I think everyone should take that particular phrase to help. Things are going to change, jobs are going to go away, stuff is going to do. The one constant will be change, and we must look to that which makes us most human over every other creature on the planet, which is adaptability. We are continually changing and adapting, and so this will just be another thing we adapt to. Knowledge will become more abundant, education will change, it will be a big referendum on education. Creativity will change. You know, I have gotten in an argument with many people, and I will not even hint to whether they're, you know, friends or workmates or ex-lovers or whatever, but I have so many people that are so, this isn't going to change me. This isn't going to change what I do. I have something that is special because I am human. I don't think that's true anymore. I think, you know, if you're a writer or a director or a software developer or a lawyer or whatever, like, I'm sorry, what makes you unique is going to get homogenized. There's no avoiding it. And it blows my mind how many people are not investing in the tools, experimenting with the tools because they find the tools to be, they find to be tools to be a threat. And so what do they go through mentally? They say, "Oh, this is probably a threat. It's really upsetting. I don't like it." And then they're angry. Here's why it can't. Here's how it can't. Here's, you know, there's a guy, John Popola, who's the founder of the Emergent Order Foundation. Great dude. We don't agree on everything from some science to politics, whatever. In the last year, we've come to violent agreement on everything. Is like, you know, he's like if you make videos right now, like if you've seen VO3, it's like, I'm sorry, but do you know what that's going to look like in a year? Do you know what it's going to look like in 2 years? Like the clock is ticking, like your world is over. And people don't want to embrace that. And so I fear that we have people making tools who are not considering enough the people they're affecting, and people who are going to be affected by the tools that are so stubborn and so arrogant about their craft that they aren't participating in the future, which is the only way for them to remain relevant and be a part of it. And I think back to iRobot, and specifically not the book, but specifically the movie, which, you know, movie compared to the book. But there's that great scene, you know, where Will Smith is interrogating the robot. He says, "Can a robot do this? Can a robot do that? You know, can a robot write a great symphony? Can it make a great piece of art or whatever?" And the robot very curiously is like, "Can you?" You know, and it's like we're getting into this world where if you're not using the tools, that is the fastest way to make sure you will be displaced by them. And that
The whole,
concerns me.
yeah, the Homo obsoletus. But that's, yeah, I mean, but that belief though, I mean, that's isn't that Buzz Lightyear to infinity and beyond? You know, it's
Yeah,
built on David Deutsch's the beginning of infinity, and I agree with you. I think we were gifted two opposable thumbs to create better tools and better problems and to have an infinite capability of progress. But it's not given, right? That's what you
that's right.
refer to. It become obsolete. So I think it's a good way. I mean, I love this, Worley, and I hope we could just end it by going down some rabbit holes without having our. We have one thing that unites us, and that's the passion for rum, right? So we figured that out.
Yeah.
Without that, let's. I just want to think about that when you said about the iRobot and the progress. So, um, what are the chances then that there aren't any borders and we'll figure out these fundamental questions? And by building these super intelligences, we will have much more speed. So, why we? And, is there a chance that there is one big giant quantum computer operating this crazy thing called life? Um, are we living in a simulation, Worley?
Yeah, I
we want to get into a little bit of,
I
you know.
don't, I don't, I, so I think the best way to do this, and I'm going to channel my ex-business partner who his second year of his passing was a couple days ago, when I was in Germany last week, and he used of this great thing that he would say, and it comes back to what you said. You talked about, probability, right? And it'd say, and so my answer would be, if I channel him, that living in a simulation is not impossible that that's what's happening, but it's probably improbable that that's what's happening. I think that simulation theory, and I could be completely proven wrong, 100%, but I believe it's kind of like for technologists what religion is for humanity, and a lot of things. And that's not to say that I don't believe in a higher being or whatever. I do, but I think it's very easy for us as a species to put our characteristics onto a bunch of other things, to put our failures onto other unforeseen, forces. It's back, more Rush songs, right? You can live, by phantom fears, and kindness that can cure, right? It's free will, right? There's this concept of, we don't know what we don't know. And the reason I like to think that we don't live in a simulation is that I'm really, really good at hacking, and I would have figured I would already have become Neo in the Matrix or whatever. I'd be much more successful with much less effort. If it was a simulation, it'd be a system I might be able to manipulate, right? Um,
But did you try though? That's the funny thing. If you would reprogram your mind to be living in a simulation, you might
Yeah,
see the
you
you
might you
might
might see it, but also to that, you could say that I would rather believe that when people think they're doing that, is that what they're really realizing is that there is entanglement across everything, right? And so there's a big difference between living in an entangled world, where I can talk to my plan and it gets healthier, not because we're in a simulation and I'm hacking that, but because there's this entanglement, there's this nature across everything. There's a bunch of ways to look at this. I mean, it's something I haven't had time to delve into, because whether we live in a simulation, whether it's an entangled, universally connected world, whether it's any one of any dozen philosophical things people have thrown out, um, the fact is, it's not the best world. If it's a simulation, honestly, it kind of sucks. And if it's entangled, then we're not entangled enough, because we have so much strife in the world, so much poverty, so much disease. Africa has lost 34% of its ability to grow crops. One of the biggest continents, one of the futures. I think you and I would agree. The continent of Africa has a huge future in technology and in everything, right? It's a developing space, um, because of the fact that cancer is killing 1 out of 6 people, in the world, because of all these things. So if it is a simulation, it's kind of a shitty one. We should work on that. And
yeah, but
and
could be if that is, you're a playful guy. Let's see, for the sake of the argument, that you're the only conscious entity, because if we are simulated, you cannot speak on
correct.
behalf of. So, and then you could look at a backlog of progress. So we live longer, less people live in poverty, we have created amazing technology. By all due respect, it's not perfect, it's a shitty world to some extent, but it's better than being born in 1900 or whatever. So we have a slight, the direction is kind of sort of, so maybe our challenge in this simulation then is to create progress, right, and to
Maybe.
experience that. So I wouldn't doom the programmer for creating the game playable, because if everything there was love, if there is no chance for suffer, then love would be a dull concept, right? So maybe that's a part of the game, isn't
Yeah, I mean, look, these are amazing. Okay, so first of all, you mentioned
got
our
it.
love for you mentioned
Industry.
our love for rum. We should this is a conversation that requires many, many liters of rum, okay? But
We'll have that.
and
Yes.
maybe a ayahuasca journey or something else, right? But
Ooh.
no, look, it's fascinating. I have not looked into it as much as I would like. It's something that I've had only a couple of good discussions on. Um, and I I think that the world and the universe and everything all the way back to the beginning of time is so much grander that being in a simulation is, I mean, I don't want to say it's a cop out. It's not, but it's a little bit like, oh, we must be in the simulation, and then, there's the quantum mechanics part of like I'm observing things and creating them and collapsing possibilities, and I lean more to there than a simulation, not because I'm in quantum computing, but just the more I learn about it, the more I say, ah, it's probably not a simulation, it's a real universe. And by the way, it is so much more complex than we think. And there are things that might happen that might lead you to think it's a simulation, right? The act of observing, the place of an observer, the being entangled with things. But we'll get together. I will bring the rum.
You're
Uh,
leaning into Copenhagen. We'll have a nice evening. That's how it
yeah,
started,
yeah.
though.
I
Yeah,
mean, it is. I
yeah.
mean, it is. We come back full circle. But I'm choosing right now where I'm investing my personal time and learning is on that side, not the simulation side, because
Right.
I think that side, whereas the simulation side doesn't have a considerable amount of evidence, the physics side kind of does. There's you know what I'm saying? Like we know these things, and so to me it leads me on. That's why I'm investing all my time. And you're right, Copenhagen. I mean, you're 100% correct, right?
Yeah, but that's why so my co-author and I, we wrote the Ex Machina, the God Experiment, where we tried to ponder the simulation hypothesis by Nick Bostrom, and we tried to prove that we are not living in a simulation. It turns out with quantum physics that it's pretty difficult, actually, and we ran into
Yeah.
that argument that if there's a simulation within a simulation ad infinitum,
Yep.
like a chain of stimulation, the base computer, given that is underlying the same physical laws with now external intervention, the base computer would come to a
Yeah.
halt, which would be, kind of sort of then some conformal cyclic cosmology that collapses into a new Big Bang or
Have you
whatever.
have you, have you
It's
seen
just,
have you seen the Rick and Morty?
was
You're in a
that?
simul. Have you seen the Rick and Morty episode with the simulation? You're in a simulation of a simulation inside another simulation. That's what they say, right?
That is
And it's because they
just,
finally built a system big enough to do that, to do
yeah.
multiple simulations. But
But
no,
then
look,
we have,
it's
yeah,
fascinating.
we have the entropy challenge at the end, and that's when it comes to a halt. And that was what we thought about. And Nick Bostrom did a good job coming up with his argument back in 2003. And I think for to your comment, I think we don't know, but that at the end to wrap it up also, it doesn't matter because I think to me at least,
Right.
because that conscious experience that we have that over our own experience, the agency, the subjectivity, it feels so real that it's worth pondering and it's worth living. And I think that is the most prestige thing that we should hold on to when we create those externalized computers, that overwriting that conscious experience or our experience that you mentioned, that we should be aware of, because I don't think that any of this is given. And I agree with you. I also worry about scenarios of automation and all these kind of things when we put all authorities into algorithms and externalize. So there is some human agency, there is some pondering to be done, and I can't wait to get down with a couple of bottles of rum with you to talk about
Me
all the
either.
other we didn't get.
That'll be great. Well, look, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it, and it's always
Well,
great chatting with you.
yeah, really, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.